Hello, I'm Robert Dick, a creative musician. I'm one of those hyphenated folks. I am a composer, a performer, an improviser, an author, and even an inventor. So, music has been at the center of my life since my childhood. My mother was a classical pianist, and classical music was important in our family. And it was just in the air that all we kids would play instruments. So there was also another kind of music along with classical music, and that was top 40 radio. And we're talking the 1950s. And it was on top 40 radio that I would hear pianists like Little Richard, and at Carnegie Hall, I would hear pianists like Sviatoslav Richter. On top 40 radio, I heard Rockin' Robin, and in it was a piccolo solo. I was transported. I had to have that sound. It turned out that it was a small version of a flute, and I campaigned for a flute, and my parents listened. And one day I came home from school, and by surprise, there was a flute teacher and a flute. I absolutely loved it. And I couldn't have verbalized it then, but I knew on some deep, deep place that I had found my thing and that this was going to be my direction in life. And I was absolutely right. I loved it then, and I've loved it more and more ever since. Now, when you learn an instrument like the flute, every week you learn a couple of new notes, gradually higher and higher and higher up the scale. And the new note moment was my favorite of each lesson. And then one day, my teacher and I came to the new note moment, and he just went right on. And I said, well, don't we have a new note? He said, well, you know all of the notes. Well, there's more to say about that, which we'll get to. But I then said, well, don't we do two notes now? I had assumed that all the instruments could do things like play harmonies and melodies. My mother's beginning piano students did that. They started out with one note, plink, plink, and then there was a bass line, boom, and then chords and melodies. My older brother played the cello, and he sawed away at one note, and then he was sawing away at least two. So this was my expectation. And at that moment, the news was broken. The flute plays only one note at a time. And I was furious and I was hurt. I like, why does everybody else get all this other stuff and we don't? And it never occurred to me that the thing to do would be to change to another instrument. I wanted to play the flute. And I remember thinking then and there that that's going to change. And it has. So it was also a very important moment in my life where for the first time I really confronted a limitation and had to evaluate that limitation for myself and say, like, would I accept it or not? And in my creative life, I've always refused to accept the idea that you can't do something. It's always been my belief that if I could imagine something, I could find the way to play it.
As you can hear from the piece in gamelan style and Time is a Two-Way Street, world music is very important to me. And I'd like to take this moment to thank my composition teacher in college, which was Yale, Robert Morris, who, amongst many other things, introduced me to listening to the music of the world. It's had an enormous lifetime impact, and I don't know how many times giving flute master classes, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of those, I remind young flutists that, you know, we're in the 21st century. Think of yourself as a member of a worldwide flute family, not just a single tradition. So also, while at Yale, I was introduced to electronic music, and I'm amongst the very last who learnt electronic music prior to the synthesizer in what was called the classical electronic music studio. And wow, that was labor intensive for sure, but the most important things about it for me were, one, the idea that anything could be made into morph into anything else. And also the idea that you were starting with nothing and you had to imagine every aspect of the sound. And I was the kind of kid who took everything apart. And so this was natural for me. So, for example, if you play a note, a quote unquote normal note on the flute, I mean, we identify that as one thing, you know, a middle E flat on a bass flute. Now, but what's actually inside it? There are many different things. There are, that's in there. Anyway, and I began to understand that if I would hear deeper into the sound, I could start to rearrange the components into new things. And so going back to our simple E flat, we could add notes below it and above it. It could be expressed simply with the air. It didn't have to go forwards.
could go backwards. And so my whole approach to hearing changed. And that was really radical. From a world of assumptions to a world of exploration. And the idea too that the larger flutes could distribute the sound as well as originate it. You know, you could put microphones along the flute, and many times I've played concerts with 4 mics on the flute, one at the mouth, one at the left hand, one at the right hand, and one at the end. And have those microphones panned so that a gigantic flute was created across the stage. So. So we're going to move on now to an excerpt from a improvisation on the bass flute I made a couple of years ago. And these two important influences, world music and electronic music, are going to overlap. Now, when I mention electronic music, I myself never use processing with the flute. The drama of my music is that it's made by a human being. And as soon as you push the first pedal, everyone will think that it's all being done in the processing. And this is organic. So I mentioned before that the word inventor as part of who I am and what I do, and the most significant invention I have come up with is called the glissando head joint. And well, here's what it does. It's kind of the whammy bar, wow, for the flute. And I can't talk about my influences without mentioning Jimi Hendrix, who was incredibly important to me as someone who was starting to create his own sound world. And I spent years and years, like just inventing sounds on the flute. Sometimes I knew what I wanted to do with them musically. Sometimes I didn't, and I thought, well, I will. When I know what I want to do musically, I'll have these. I know I'm going to need them. And Hendrix is so far ahead in his creation of an astonishing sound world for the guitar. And I believe that he also shared the belief that if he could imagine it, he could create the way to play it, and he did. So if you were me, you would have whammy bar envy, seriously, really seriously. And you'd have to do something about it. So with the help of several wonderful flute maker friends, Eva Kingma, Caspar Bechy, and Bigford Brannan, this is what happened. Improvisation is an incredibly important musical stream in my life, whether solo or in collaboration with other musicians, actors, dancers, painters. This idea of getting together and creating together spontaneously is something I truly treasure. Most of my performing currently is improvised. I've had a number of partnerships over the years, and most notably new wins with Ned Rothenberg and J.D. Perrin, the trio, the ADD trio, with the drummer Steve Arguelles and guitarist Christy Doran, collaboration with the Soldier String Quartet, but by far the most involved, longest, and far-reaching and far-roaming journey has been with the pianist Ursel Schlicht. And we've been playing together since 2004. So, I've never actually been on a musical journey before that went to so many places and achieved such depth. Now, the hallmark of our music is our mixture of composition and improvisation. They are fused together in many, many different ways. And sometimes we springboard from imagery, such as our suite, The Galilean Moons, or from concepts from nature. Sometimes we pose musical challenges to ourselves. And, for example, glissandi from two instruments that supposedly can't play glissandi. Now, you heard us briefly in an excerpt from a concert we gave at Roulette in New York. And now we're going to hear and see Io, the first movement of the Galilean Moons, from a concert at the Exploratorium in Berlin. Io is the most volcanic body in the solar system. Time to say thank you and goodbye. The first thanks are to you for watching this video. I'd like to say thank you to Composers Now for doing this, not only for me, but for composers in general. I mean, that's a very positive thing in the world. And I'd especially like to thank my dear friend Rindy Eckert for helping me so much with making this video. So I do hope you'll want to follow my music a little bit more. You can go to my website, robertdick.net, and you can sign on to my email list and get updates in the continuing journey. Thanks a lot.